Welcome to the L&D Podcast with your host, Nick Day of JDA Recruitment, specialist HR recruiters. This podcast is sponsored by Think Learning, specialists in learning and performance technologies. Visit thinklearning.com to find out more.
Hello and welcome to the HR L&D Podcast. Today I am joined by Celia Delaney, a keynote speaker, MC and comedian. Celia started her career at Unilever as Human Resources Manager before embarking on a successful acting career and then going on to establishing her training business, Speaking Success. She's passionate about presentation skills, persuasion, and more recently, comedy. And that's something we're going to be exploring in a lot of detail during the course of this podcast. Celia has the Level 5 diploma from the CIPD in Learning and Development Management, and she has a Master's in Experimental Psychology from Oxford University. She's a fellow of the Professional Speaking Association and was recently voted their Speaker of the Year. She's an inspiring public speaker on effective presentation skills, persuasion and confidence, and sometimes surprises audience by singing during her speeches. She uses comedy to give her an original take on communication skills, which is why clients turn to her when looking for original after-dinner speakers. In her training business, Celia has developed a core set of skills called I Persuade. And that's something in particular we're going to be exploring in a lot more detail during the course of this episode. Through I Prepare, I Present and I Promote, you can learn the secrets of great writing and delivery, and crucially, how to promote, sell and influence when speaking to groups or individuals. She's coached more than 5,000 people in persuasion across the public and private sectors, so I'm hugely excited to find out how she combines comedy within HR and learning and development, and hear more about When You Laugh, You Learn. So welcome, Celia, to the HR L&D Podcast.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful introduction.
L&D Podcast Discovery, questions to set the scene.
So, Celia, to many of our listeners, it may feel like a big jump between being an HR manager to becoming a comedian. So first things first, can you tell us a little bit more about how your career started?
Well, there is a 20-year gap between those two things. I came out of university when I was 21 and I went into HR because I really liked thinking about how people tick. I just love people. I'd already studied psychology,
Right.
And HR seemed like a natural progression to me. But I did know as well that I really wanted to be an actress. I was harboring that dream. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to do it. But in the end, I realized I did want to do it. And I applied to drama school and got in. And so I left a perfectly good HR corporate career, much to the upset of my family, I'm sure, and ran off to go to drama school. I think also when I was doing HR, though I really liked it and I have a lot of respect for it, I wasn't necessarily good at being serious enough for HR. You know, when I was sacking people, I would just be too fun about it. And I realized I didn't have necessarily the seriousness required.
Sure.
So I was better off in the arts. So that's how it all started. I went to drama school and became an actress. And then I actually gave up acting when I was about 30 and became a trainer and a coach in communication skills. Quite a common route for actors to go into because obviously they feel qualified to tell people how to communicate. And it was still a few more years until I became a comedian. That really emerged after I became a keynote speaker. And then I became an MC for award ceremonies. And when I was doing that, I was becoming more and more funny. And then all of a sudden I was a comedian. So really, it's taken me 20 years to come full circle. So now I am an entertainer, but I also work in corporate. And sometimes I do in-house L&D work as well. But mostly I'm a freelance consultant and I teach people communication skills and I get up on stage and do comedy. And it seems to work fine.
Good. And it has kind of come full circle. You started in HR and obviously you've got your I Persuade program, which we're going to find out more about, where you're kind of linking your comedic experience, if you like, with your HR experience and your L&D experience. Mm-hmm. For so many people, though, the idea of being comical or being a comedian would be absolutely terrifying. So, it's one of those scary things where people ask themselves, are they funny? Obviously, you've had to come to terms with the fact that you are funny because you're obviously operating in that space now. So when did you sort of discover that you were funny and you had this ability to be a comedian?
I was definitely not particularly funny as a child. I would really like to point that out to people. I was like Hermione Granger at school. I was a real swot. I loved studying and I was quite serious, I think. And then one day I woke up, I was 40 and I discovered I was funny. It was like overnight, decided I'm funny.
Okay.
And I think what had really happened under the surface was that I'd been making my friends laugh at dinner parties through my 30s. And really, without realizing it, had been practicing the skills of just telling a good anecdote. That's not the same as telling a joke or having to write jokes, but just learning the timing and the nature of what makes people laugh. I think I had been doing that for a decade. And then I did 5 minutes of comedy at a conference. I spend most of my time at conferences. There was an opportunity to do a 5-minute set, and I took the opportunity. And half of the material was terrible and the other half was good. But I loved the feeling of being back on stage. And I realized, I miss this. I've got the bug. I've got to go back to it. This is it. And I walked off the stage after that 5 minutes and I thought, that is what I'm going to do for a living.
Wow.
No, nobody else that evening that took part in that competition had that thought, just me.
I've been, I don't know if you've been following it on, I think it's on Amazon Prime, The Marvelous Miss Maisel.
Yes.
It sounds like a similar story, She didn't know she was funny until she got on stage, and it just kind of consumed her, and she loved every minute of it. She made everybody laugh, and, I'm still going through the story at the moment. But
So am I.
It sounds like a similar story.
And I think, you can learn comedy. That's an important thing to point out. I do feel like, I wouldn't say I feel like I'm a natural. I would say that I have studied it now. I've read books on it. I've learned how to do it better. And I continue to learn that. So I don't want anyone to be put off because they don't think they're naturally funny. I think you can learn a lot.
But it's something you still, like anything, I guess, you need to practice and work at to improve and get better. So from your perspective, then, why do you think, in relation to, I guess, the context of this podcast, why do you think that humour is so important in the workplace?
Well, comedy's immensely popular in people's personal lives, isn't it? They tune into Live at the Apollo. That's a prime time show. Michael McIntyre's show on a Saturday night. Most of the programmes that people watch outside of the soaps are funny. And they go in their droves to comedy nights. I can tell you there's a place I go called Angel Comedy where I perform, and they have comedy 7 nights a week, sometimes 3 shows a night, and it's full. It's absolutely full of people going to watch comedy. Yeah. So we know that we seek having a laugh in our own lives. And we also know at work that a good deal of people are very disengaged with their work. They don't enjoy the work they do. They don't feel it has purpose. They feel misunderstood. And I think there's a massive link between those two things. I think that if we can bring humour into the workplace, it's extremely motivating for people. It's engaging. It helps them to bond with each other. And I think they are more likely to bounce into work and say that they enjoy being there if it's somewhere that they can have a laugh.
Sure. Well, I think, engagement's such a hot topic right now for HR departments, or for brands generally, and how can they engage their employees better. If comedy is a strategy they can deploy to improve that engagement, then why not? So from your perspective then, Celia, how have you included comedy or humour within learning and development?
Well, I think it starts right from the marketing piece. So when you're trying to get learners to take up a new idea, if you want them to do some e-learning, or you're asking them to sign up to a workshop or whatever it is that you're offering within the workplace, I think in the marketing, it's a good idea to include some humour. I've done all kinds of things, from just little silly videos. I've made fun videos. I've made fun posters, like Your Country Needs You kind of posters, or, photoshopping people into pictures and little cartoon captions where they have a conversation about the learning. So anything that makes it fun or funny that helps them to notice it. And they're just more likely then to turn up, and it's more likely to stick. They're more likely to consume the workshop or the e-learning as well. Sure. So I think it really starts there. That's really fun. And then also within the instructional design, I think you should integrate humour from the start. So when you're actually designing a workshop or a piece of e-learning, then think about where you could have a bit of fun along the way. Where could people play a game or take a quiz that has some funny answers in it? Or how could they spot something that's funny? So a lot of e-learning is built around quizzes. Say you might get a picture. If you're doing, I used to do training in hospitality. If you're doing training people how to work a bar, for example, they'll look at a picture of a bar and they'll have to pick different things out. And one of the funny things you can do is just plant something that's just a bit stupid. It's not meant to be there. It's just more fun like that for people. And they don't know when they're going to get the fun thing, and that keeps them on their toes. And also, e-learning particularly, I think, can be very predictable, and humour is very good at disrupting patterns. That thing of keeping people on their toes is a really good idea, because they want to see what's round the next corner. and see if there's something funny there. And so they're more likely to keep going for longer in order to get that reward, in a sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I picked up on a word that you used a few times in explaining that, which is the word fun. Of course, fun and funny are two different words, but I can tell in the way that you are utilising comedy in your L&D that you can be funny through fun. They're two different things, but obviously your comedy comes through fun play.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think of them as in the same territory, because I want people to take the pressure off themselves to be funny. I think that's a huge pressure, and then it can stop people doing anything at all. So I often say to people, don't try and be funny, just be fun. Have fun and find the funny, and it will come if you relax a little bit more. Just look around you in life and see what's funny. And then just repeat that. You don't even have to write a joke. You just have to tell an anecdote or, repeat something that happened the other day. And in itself, these things are funny. You don't have to construct them. It's much more about having your filters set to fun. That's what I often say to people, not set to stun, as they do in Star Wars. That's what we don't want in learning. We don't want set to stun. We want set to fun. And then that in itself, having that attitude, usually then shows you where the fun could take place, because you're out actively looking for it.
Right. And of course, as well as finding out you're funny at 40. I think I mentioned in my introduction, you've also got some higher level academic expertise in this area, in the sense that you've got a master's in experimental psychology from Oxford University. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about that master's that you did at Oxford, and also the science behind humour and learning.
Sure. I mean, I did this a long time ago. 25 years ago when I started my degree, and actually psychology has moved on a long way since then. I think I'm interested at the moment in the more modern neuroscience and some of the findings that are coming out of that. And particularly comedy is about making connections in your mind between two things that you normally wouldn't connect. And we know about the brain that we make new neural pathways when we ask people to think about one thing and think about another thing and put them together in a way that they wouldn't normally. We know that the brain has to connect those physically. And that's a good thing for the brain. It's good for it to build new connections. And that's what we're trying to do when we get people to learn. We're asking them to build new connections. So humour and learning are very linked in the way that the brain treats them. So that's a really good basis for combining the two. It's a good argument for it.
Sure.
And also there's a limbic system in the brain, which many people will have heard of as well, that releases chemicals when we laugh. So when we find something funny, we've discovered that we release chemicals, endorphins that are pleasurable, things like dopamine that we associate with pleasure and reward. And so when we laugh, we find it rewarding. We want to laugh more. We seek things that make us laugh. And so that's also very good. What you're looking for with learning is to give people a sense of pleasure and reward. Why? Because they'll come back again and do it more. And also we know that they're more likely to retain it, more likely to use it, because it was seen as a pleasant thing to do. So that's also a very good argument. And I mentioned earlier as well, social psychology. People tend to bond together when they laugh together. In a comedy club, it's very common that we try to push them all together, put the seats close together and make sure it's nice and warm in the room. And we call that like the coals on a barbecue. You're trying to get the coals to light and then spread the warmth around between the people. And that's a much better condition for laughter in a comedy club than if everybody sits separately and the room is quite cold. And then it's very difficult to get them laughing. That's like a piece of psychology applied in that context. Maybe when you get next time and get people into a workshop, get them all to sit on each other's knee. I don't know.
Well, I've certainly been to a lot of comedy stores. I've never made the association, but I guess it makes total sense. And certainly if you're sat miles away from everybody else and you feel more isolated, it's much harder to have that, as you say, that bond with other people. When other people laugh, you tend to laugh more freely.
Yeah.
I think also you mentioned some of the release of dopamine, endorphins and other things that we link with reward and pleasure. I guess we've seen in society as well more, laughing type businesses pop up as well. I think I saw an advertisement the other week for laughing yoga, for example. And I've heard that if you laugh, even if it's a fake laugh, actually your body can still release the same chemicals if you smile and the same chemicals if you laugh than if it was genuine. Is that correct, or have I got that incorrect?
Yes. Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's the basis of those ideas. And we've known that for quite a long time with visualization. So the brain behaves in the same way if you visualize something going well, like athletes imagining a race. If they go through the race in their mind, the body thinks the race is happening to some extent. It won't be quite as high on the readings as if you're actually doing it, but the pattern will look the same when you scan the brain. So it's very interesting that we can imagine things going well and influence them going well through that positive visualization. And we now know that that's the same with laughter. Even if we create laughter artificially, we will get some of the same benefits as if we genuinely belly laugh because something stimulates us to do that. So yeah, all of the science is pointing in the direction of this being a good thing. And yet there still isn't enough of it. I can see that there is sometimes a resistance to it, to putting it in place. And I think that's a real shame. I think people are really missing a trick here.
It seems surprising there would be any resistance, because everything you've said from both the scientific point of view and actually just the way you're putting it seems to me like it makes total sense. That you want to learn in an environment where you're having fun and you're more likely to be engaged, as you mentioned, if you're enjoying it and you find it funny. So you mentioned the word resistance. What kind of resistance do you get then from people about including humour in the learning and development programme? And is it because you think the humour is misunderstood, or is it a different type of resistance that you're coming across?
I think there's a couple of things. One is that it's seen as irrelevant or silly or superfluous to requirements. So it's just slightly dismissed sometimes. And I think we hear phrases like, let's get down to serious business now. Whereas I think serious business is funny business. I think it is. They can absolutely coexist. You think about the negotiations for Brexit. I bet there haven't been many laughs there. But they really would have benefited from, if they could have had a laugh together, I'm sure that the negotiations would have gone a lot better. Really, there's far too much seriousness. There's too much drama around it. Really, there should be a little bit more light touch about it, in my opinion, and noticing the emotional side of things and connecting with the emotional side of things, which is one of the ways we can do that is through laughing together. So I think it can be dismissed by people who think that life is serious, and business is serious. And I think also the second resistance I hear is that people worry that it will go wrong, that they'll attempt to put a joke in at the beginning of a workshop or a speech, or they'll put some funny quizzes into e-learning and it will get rejected. People will not laugh or will criticize it even. And the fear of that can stop people from doing it at all. And that's such a shame, because then nothing happens, nothing improves. Whereas I would urge people to say, you've got to take risks in life. All you have to do is test and measure it like anything else. I write a new joke. I don't just put it in a show and take it to the fringe. I go and try out that joke several times on several different audiences, and I find out what works. And then when I've honed it, then I put it into a show and I let the critics look at it and critique it like you would if you were putting it into some learning. So you don't do it straight away. You go and try it out. And I think it's understanding almost how to build comedy that people need. They need to understand that there's a process to it. The shame is that they see comedians on live at the Apollo. They look amazingly polished. The audience is laughing at every single joke. And they think that that comedian was born like that and that they've never experienced any failure. Whereas, of course, that's nonsense. They have done so many hours in terrible clubs in basements somewhere in the Northeast, and suffered through terrible comedy shows where they've tried stuff out and it hasn't worked. And then they've learned from that and they've changed it. So the trouble is with comedy is people see the finished product and think that's how it should be. But actually, there's a lot of work has gone into making it look like that. So I would urge people to think of an idea and just straight away test it out as quickly as you can. And then if it works, keep it in or not.
It's funny you were mentioning about, where these, comedians apply their trade to get it polished. Going back years ago now, I used to be on an editorial board of a publication that went out across the UK, kind of a business publication. And I went to the downstairs basement of Belushi's, which is near London Bridge, and they get catered for about 12 people in the audience. And I saw Michael McIntyre, and he was absolutely brilliant. There was an audience of, say, maybe 7 to 12 of us. He was trying out all the materials. He was absolutely hilarious, and obviously he's gone on to great things. I left that underground sort of basement gig, if you like, where no one knew who he was. I went straight to my MD and said, look, I've seen this guy. He's brilliant. We should get him booked for the awards ceremony that links to the publication. But the guy, my MD said, I've never heard of him. We can't book someone we don't know. People are going to expect a big name. And actually, they rejected my idea and they booked Sandy Tosvig instead because she was a big name at the time. Anyway, lo and behold, we always plan these awards for 12 months in advance or thereabouts. Within that 12-month period, Michael McIntyre became like the biggest thing ever. And I remember being sat with him in Belushi's right after his gig. He was asking us how the gig went. What did you think of the jokes? And I was with him. I said, look, I thought it was brilliant. Give me a card, which he did. And I said, I'll try and get you booked into this awards thing. And of course, he was really up for it. I don't know what we could have got him for. It'd have been obviously next to nothing in terms of cost. We'd have booked him in early and we would have had Michael McIntyre at the awards ceremony. Anyway, it never happened. But it's interesting to link it back because he was testing everything out. And as you say, everyone else seeing him 12 months later would have seen this polished act on television. But actually, he was plying his trade and testing it in little audiences at, downstairs bars of pubs like Belushi. It's only from doing that you get the feedback to realise what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, what a great story, though. I get to MC quite a lot of awards and I'm not known, I get booked as an MC and then I can be funny and try stuff out on corporate audiences. There's usually at least 100 people, sometimes 500 people in front of me. And that's a great testing ground of being an MC because I'm on and off stage all the time. I can just try something each time I get on stage and see, and generally I know it's going to go well because I do a lot of in-jokes to the companies and they are always an absolute winner. If people are looking for the secret to comedy, the secret is make it relatable to your audience.
Yeah.
If you talk about your audience and about things that they love to talk about. So if you're in a company, then it's the in-jokes. They love seeing the CEO, ribbed for something or other. If they have a terrible computer system, then you make jokes about that. Or if you're up in front of a lot of people who are parents, then you make jokes about kids. That is a lot of the secret to it, is the relevance. Do your research on your audience and then serve it back up to them, the very thing that they want. And I really think that's where Michael McIntyre does so well. He's immensely universal and relatable, as well as just having a lovely style about him. So that's hence his enduring popularity.
For those that aren't aware, maybe not be yet, but I'll put a link to your website, Celia, because there are some examples of where you do relate specific jokes to specific audiences on your website. There's a number of videos there that people can check out. So if you are interested in booking Celia for an MC gig, definitely go to the website and I'll put a link in there. Little plug. Back to the episode. So from an L&D perspective, how important do you think humour is for learner engagement specifically?
Yeah. So I think it's vital. I would say that, I know. But I think one of the reasons for that is that humour really gives learning a human feel. Robots can't tell jokes yet, thank goodness. They're taking over everything else, but they are rubbish at telling jokes. I saw a speaker at a conference and he was doing some stuff on Alexa, and he had an Alexa on stage and he said, Alexa, tell us a joke. And it was terrible. It was just the delivery of it. They go, why did the chicken cross the road? That it just doesn't come off as human at all. And so however much technology can help us within learning, and it's an incredible thing, I don't think it can bring what a human can bring in terms of wonderful kind of satire, sarcasm, commentary on the world. We can do that. So that's very engaging for people. They do want to relate human to human. You can tell if something's had a human touch. And so I think that's the very, very vital thing when we come to engagement.
Brilliant.
And secondly, engaging people, what I say, when you laugh, you learn. That's what I like to say.
It's a great saying. And obviously link that to your I Persuade e-learning courses as well, haven't you? Which is obviously something that we're really keen to find out more about in this episode as well. So can you tell the audience a little bit more about your new I Persuade e-learning course that links that when you laugh, you learn concept?
Yeah, absolutely. So I decided, having been a coach now for over 7 years, I work with mostly executives and some of their teams on public speaking and persuasion. Sometimes that's sales as well within persuasion, but a lot of the time people are interested in being an influencer and persuading people to come with them on a journey of some kind. So I love that work. I've been teaching that communication skills, body of work for a long enough time that I felt it needed to be written down. And I had a choice. I could have written a book, or I felt more suited to me was to get it down on video, because I love being in front of the camera. I enjoy it. I feel like I can speak directly to people in a way that's easier than writing for me. Yeah. So I got into the studio last year and laid down everything that I teach around public speaking and persuasion under the label I Persuade, which is the brand I've been working under for a good few years. So it's really fun. It's intended to help people learn without having to see me, because I can't individually coach everybody. And it's quite expensive, I suppose, to work with someone one-to-one. So this is much more affordable. It gives more scale to it. Also, I can bundle it in with coaching so people can have, a bit more added value when they work with me. And within there, I do include a video on humor. I'd like to do more on the funny thing about speaking. That's a speech that I do around adding humor to your speeches. I just have one section in I Persuade for it. And the rest of the time, I guess I'm just being a little bit humorous and amusing to carry the message along. But yeah, I'd love to do more in the future. I'm really intending to write more and record more about humor to go along with this series.
Great. Where can people access the I Persuade e-learning courses at the moment?
Well, it's hosted on a platform called Thinkific, which I really love because for me, it's very easy to use. And we have our own domain called speakingsuccess-tv.thinkific.com.
Okay.
But you can just search. You go to Thinkific and search for Speaking Success. That's my brand. That's my company.
I'll put a link in the episode notes as well. So if anyone's interested, speedy link just goes to the episode notes of this episode.
Sure, yeah. And also I've partnered up with Think Learning, who are sponsoring this podcast. They're going to offer those e-learning courses to their clients who are largely in healthcare, or many of them are in healthcare. So that would be really great to be able to offer it to that market. A lot of people there who are under a lot of stress, but nonetheless need to do persuading and public speaking often on a daily basis. So I like that.
I'm going to ask, because I know Sean, I've known Sean well for a number of years, a good friend of mine. I know he Think Learning operate very heavily within the healthcare sector. I know Sean does as well. So what's the link then for you? Have you had experience yourself in working then directly with the NHS within the healthcare sector?
Yeah.
I would have thought that sort of adding comedy to the healthcare sector might be quite difficult.
Oh, they need it. They really need it. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
I've been a keynote speaker for the NHS for the last couple of years, and for some private healthcare and care at home companies as well. So I've gone in to speak about various topics, but often around persuasion. But I've built some bespoke speeches for the NHS and done some entertainment for them as well. And one of the speeches I did was about stress and stress management, because obviously that's top of their list a lot of the time. And I gave everybody a balloon. There was about 150 people in the room, gave them all a balloon at the end of the speech and asked them to blow it up and blow all of their stress into this balloon, and then to let the balloons go all at once. And at the time, there was that big hit from the Disney cartoon Frozen, let it go, that one. And I sang that while they were letting all of these balloons go. And of course, balloons are very silly when they let go. They all kind of go spinning around the room, make loads of noise. So it was a very fun way to end the speech, and they've mentioned it many times since, this legendary moment of letting the balloons go. So they enjoyed that very much, And there's some of the funniest people are in healthcare. They have to. I think you should spend time. Anyone who spends time around death and dying are some of the funniest people. Like undertakers. Have you ever met an undertaker? They're hilarious.
I don't think I have.
Well, let's hope you haven't met one. But yeah, they're very very funny because. In a way, people that deal with darkness need to find more light, and so because that's the contrast for them. So they're often actually a really great audience. Yeah,
the balloon story sounds brilliant, and the fact, as you say, if it's being retold, I guess that's kind of a reinforcement of both the engagement and whatever story you were telling anyway. Yeah. If people are retelling it, that's it kind of gives credence to what you're delivering. I love the fact you just burst into song. I think Sean told me that might happen. You've got a great voice there.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I trained at Mount View, darling. I went to acting and musical theatre school. Okay. So, yeah, I'm now I make jokes out of show tunes these days. I don't sing them seriously. But yeah, very, very glad of that background.
I also did a master's in theatre, but I can't sing like that. So it doesn't...
Stick to carrying the furniture.
Definitely more my style. Before we ask a few questions, find out a little bit more about you, the person, what are the key things that people could do to start thinking about adding humour into their learning?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier, find the funny in the everyday. You don't need to write comedy, you just need to write it down. That's really important. And actually carrying a notebook, or these days I put it all on my phone. There's an app called Evernote that I use, although there's lots of notes applications that come with phones. Just write it down. You will forget it. You think you'll remember something that's funny, and then you just forget it. It goes by. I spun an anecdote out of, I found a dog the other day and took this dog in and was very excited about potentially owning this dog. And it turned out it was next door's dog. So all I did really was borrow a dog. In fact, what I really did was I stole a dog, it turns out. And that was quite embarrassing when they came to get it, because I was just trying to hide this dog. So I wrote that down, that it happened. And also it subsequently meant that I've spun more material out of that as a result. So, but I would just forget that after a few weeks, I'm sure that would go. So that's the key, get it written down. And then after that, learn how to tell a good story. Like me in my 30s, just make people laugh in an informal setting, practice down the pub is what I always say, and see what works. Why do people find particular words funny or particular timing funny? I know that's more about spoken, performed comedy, which I'm interested in, but it does help you with writing it as well. You get a sense of what works and what people respond to. And then the third thing is know your audience. As I was saying, that key into what's relatable and universal. Think about what's topical. If you're ever stuck, look on Twitter and see what's trending that day. There will always be things that are happening that are funny, which again, you don't have to write jokes about, you just have to repeat them. And there you are. That's free material from social media every single day of your life.
Fantastic advice. Brilliant. Well, listen, we're going to find out a little bit more about you.
Time to find out more about you.
So first question, Celia, what is it like to work with you?
Well, it's very fun, obviously. I'm very relaxed and easygoing as a person. I think I have a rule in my business that my clients need to feel like friends. If they don't pass that test, they're out. Yeah. I don't work with them. If they don't feel like friends. If they're too stressy, they're out. I'm not interested. Because, I'm the ruler of my own life now. So that's how it is. And people sometimes ask me, what is it like to work with you? And it's difficult to answer. So sometimes I say to them, it will be like slipping into a warm bath. And they go, oh, that sounds lovely. I don't know what it means. I say, no, I don't know what it means either, but sounds good. And by the time you've had a laugh about that, then you feel like friends, because friends laugh together. So that's why it feels good.
So how would your friends describe you then? And how would your friends describe you?
I dread to think how they would describe me. I think what my friends like about me is that I'm pioneering. I tend to be the first one to do anything. I'm quite brave, I definitely have courage. So whereas a lot of people think about something or talk about it, I'll probably go ahead and do it. I'm happy to take the risk on everybody else's behalf and report back from the front line. And I think that's what it takes to be in comedy, actually. You've got to push yourself forward a little bit and experience life and be willing to have life experiences that perhaps other people might write off as negative, but which full well are going to end up on stage as anecdotes, in a couple of weeks' time. So yeah, I think I'm good fun and I'm pretty courageous. I think those are quite good qualities. I
think you need to be both of those, don't you? If you're going to be successful in comedy, you need to have courage. That's why most people don't get up on stage, and you definitely need to be funny. Yeah. Professionally or personally, what is your proudest achievement to date?
I think getting into Oxford.
Sure.
Probably because I felt that was against all the odds.
Sure.
I grew up in Sheffield and I went to a state school. We didn't have a sixth form. Margaret Thatcher closed our sixth form, so I had to go to some dreadful tertiary college, which is now also shut. And I was very angry with Margaret Thatcher for closing it.
I thought you were going to say something else.
It no longer exists, so I can say what I like about it. But yeah. It was pretty rough. I was very annoyed at Margaret Thatcher for closing my sixth form. So I rebelled. Ironically, my rebellion was to go to Oxford because I felt that would be so different from the hand that had been dealt me with going to this terrible A-level college. So it's a funny kind of rebellion, but it did make me laugh that when I went to Oxford, I ended up at Somerville College, which is where Margaret Thatcher studied. And every day I had to walk past a statue of her And every day it made me smile that the very reason that I was there was because she'd made me angry, so angry that I'd applied to Oxford. So yeah, it's good.
I couldn't just make that up, could you? That's brilliant. Love it. Apart from your sixth form closing, tell us about a time when things haven't gone the way that you wanted.
I'm not sure I should give any secrets away, given that I speak on persuasion. Surely everything I want, I get. I think so.
Oh, fair enough. We'll close up with that. If you could be given any superpower, what would it be?
The ability to be in two places at the same time. That would be wondrous.
Okay.
I'm very curious about life. I find lots of things interesting and exciting and can get quite overwhelmed at wanting to do them all at the same time. And I also deliver all of the work myself now. I don't have other trainers. So I do get offered work and it clashes. So I'm not able to do both things and that drives me mad. So I think just in terms of enjoying life, but also delivering all the work that I'm asked to do, if I could be in two places at the same time, that would be amazing. I could lead a double life. Yeah.
I know that when we spoke previously as well, I know that linking it back to HR, from the HR side, obviously your background initially was as an HR manager. There was a situation, I believe, that occurred as well where you offered two HR management roles at the same time. I think that you wanted to take them both.
Yeah, that's right. Very strange that when I first moved to London, I wasn't sure whether I was going to carry on running my business in the way I am now. So I decided to go in-house with L&D for a while. And I got two wonderful roles offered. And one was in a luxury hotel, which is the one I took, and no regrets there. It was a fantastic place. But the other one was with the police, and it was a new spin-off of the police. Wow. And I've always been very drawn to the police, so it was a very difficult dilemma, but they were moving at different speeds in terms of the offers, and the hotel got there first. And I felt like I'd said yes to them first. So in the end, I did the honourable thing and went with the one that I felt had progressed the quickest. And as I say, how can you know what else would have happened? It's like the film Sliding Doors. I'm always obsessed with that film, the one with Gwyneth Paltrow and John Hannah. So, whatever she does, she ends up with John Hannah. But in one version, she loses an earring, and the other one, she dies. So, it's important which train you get on.
Absolutely. What a great position to be in, though. What two great roles to be offered at the same time. And as you say, you've got no regrets at all, which is fantastic. Well, so we're going to dive back into a couple of final L&D questions before we open the L&D vault. We're going to quickly jump to a quick advert from our sponsors, Think Learning.
Engage, learn, perform with Think Learning, specialists in learning and performance technologies. We're experts in solving the challenges of targeting, tracking, training in regulated environments. We have developed the Totara platform to provide a cost-effective, organisation-wide talent solution that can help you to provide a safer and better place to work. Customisable workflows promotes engagement through onboarding and induction, whilst an intuitive user interface helps drive ongoing engagement with learning. Bespoke workflows for performance appraisal and integration to payroll and recruitment systems transform Totara into a powerful and holistic talent platform. You'll find us to be responsive, collaborative and solution-focused. Visit thinklearning.com for more information. The L&D Podcast. Final questions to help listeners engage, learn and perform.
So we'll jump into the final L&D questions. Number one, thinking practically now, Celia, what are some of the key ways that humour can be designed into learning and e-learning?
Well, think about that marketing. So how are you going to draw in people to take up the learning in the first place? What could be fun and funny?
Yeah.
Instructional design. So try to start and end with fun or laughter. That's what I always say. Try to get some rapport at the beginning using humour, and again, close with a good memory of everybody having fun or laughing together, or there being a silly quiz or something at the end. Even just when I'm doing workshops, I do a group selfie and I get them all to cheer. And even just in cheering and then everybody huddling together, they tend to laugh together as well. And that's how the workshop ends, especially when I was doing the luxury hotel and they're working long hours. They really love that. And the third thing is to make sure that you've got fun planted into the learning in places that are surprising. So don't let it get predictable for people. Make them work harder to get the fun. Make them look round the next corner, as it were, to find out whether there's something fun there. And then you're using fun as a reward as well as a learning tool.
Brilliant. Before we enter the L&D vault, it obviously makes sense to ask, I guess, why L&D professionals listening to this HR L&D podcast should be encouraged to integrate humour into the workplace. If you were to summarise it as kind of some key, 4 or 5 bullet points, if you like, as to why people should really take this very seriously. I know we talk about how, and adding comedy to L&D, but actually we're being very serious about adding comedy at the same time. So I wonder if you could just break that down into a couple of bullet points as to...
Well, I think that HR can have a poor reputation in many companies because it's seen as deadly dull and serious and, the police force of the organization. And that can be a dangerous reputation to have because people don't readily come to HR or they dread going on training or they don't take up the learning because they think it's going to be dull. So it's very important to fight that reputation, I think. And the joy of the L&D side of HR is that you get to be good cop in many ways. You get to escape some of the harsher bits of HR. Now that I work in L&D, I don't have to hire and fire anymore. I just get to deal with people once they're in the organization. So that's a real privilege. And so lightening that up is something that I think is very worthwhile bearing in mind and the impact that has on reputation. The other thing is that, I think L&D needs to work hard to make itself indispensable to the workforce. One could argue that people can learn by themselves now. They've got the internet, they can go on some big journey online and learn for themselves. And we can learn almost anything from YouTube. So what is L&D bringing to the table? And again, it's that human quality that L&D can bring, that they can add and to gain good relationships with learners, using humour. So that's a bit about not letting the robots win, I suppose, still having some kind of thing to offer. It's great that in L&D people want to provide top quality content, of course. But I think what the new generation of people look for now is an experience. We hear this talked about a lot at conferences. People want experiences because there is now too much information in the world. We've got loads of information on the internet, and what we're looking for is an experience. And who wouldn't want that experience to be fun? That's my question.
Yeah, well, it's a great way of putting it. And you're absolutely right on the experience thing. As you say, we're kind of so much news out there. It's hard to digest it all. And people are always looking for new creative ways of being engagement. So if we can make that be engaging, if we can make that experience fun, why not? Love it. Brilliant. But so we're going to open the L&D vault.
Opening the L&D vault.
What is one piece of advice you would give to someone working in learning and development right now?
Let the learners get involved.
Okay.
I teach this in public speaking. When people get up to do a speech, they almost always make the mistake of thinking that a speech is a monologue, that it is just them speaking to the audience and the audience has to sit there and be quiet and take it in. And I always say, nobody said there was a rule that said it had to be a monologue. It can be a dialogue. It can be a conversation. And in fact, the best types of speeches, if you want to watch things like TED Talks, one of the overt objectives of those is that they seem conversational. That's what TED will ask you to do. And I think that it is two-way.
Yeah.
And I think that's about learning creation as well. Get your learners involved in creating the learning in the first place and then keep them involved all the way along. So that's the way that L&D is going now. It's not going to be a case of designing training and pushing it out to people. It's a conversation.
Great. Fantastic. So with the benefit of hindsight, what would be the one career decision you would change?
I would nip back and take the other train in the sliding doors analogy and do that job for the police as well. I'd want to do that as well.
Great. That was easy. Fantastic. Yeah. So when you look at the L&D profession then from an Eagles viewpoint, if you like, what do you think is currently holding the industry back?
Well, on one hand, I don't think it's for me to say. I'm an external these days. I'm a consultant. So that's tricky because I don't feel like I'm an in-house L&D anymore.
Okay.
But if I was going to guess when I meet people at conferences, it might be to not overcomplicate things. Learners are, as we've discussed, very self-directing these days, very bright. We're not living in times where people can't read or write, so we don't have to spell things out to them. They're phenomenal at finding information for themselves. So I think that L&D is struggling with its identity at the moment, trying to find a place within that. And I think it's about having an ease in allowing learners to get on with it, do what they want to do, and trying to find your role within that.
Sure.
How can you partner with learners? How can you encourage and support them? Make the learning into an experience for them, as I was saying.
Yeah.
How can you justify your role there with a generation of people who are really very bright, very capable already? I would say think about what value you can add. And I'm sure there is plenty of value still to be added.
Fantastic. Brilliant. So if we're sitting here a year from now celebrating what a great year it's been for you, Celia, what would you have hoped to have achieved?
I'm very excited about where my comedy's going at the moment. I'm writing a new show called Angelic, is the working title.
Okay.
And I'm hoping to perform that in the Fringe, the Camden Fringe in August in London, in a venue called the Bill Murray Pub, which is part of Angel Comedy, and where a lot of really good names go and do their work in progress shows. So about a week ago, they had Eddie Izzard there, who I think is an absolute legend.
Wow.
So it's a really great stomping ground for new and established acts to go and inflict their material on the unsuspecting public. So I'll be doing that in August, which I'm really excited about. And in terms of the other business things I do, I hope I'll have coached some more great, inspiring executives and worked on incredible speeches. I had the great privilege to work on a speech on Grenfell last year that was going out to the construction industry.
Wow.
It was by a woman, and she's quite senior in construction, and she's my absolute heroine because she just did an amazing job with it. And it was lovely to get to speech write with her and to, give my ideas as to how something so difficult could be communicated well. So that was a really, really great moment. Cool. And I hope I'll have been on stage all year, being funny every week, whether that's as an MC or as a comedian. That's what I'll look back on and hope for. And I will own a dog. That's also a big ambition. I've never had a dog. And we're currently applying to get a rescue dog.
Oh, lovely.
And I'm super excited because I'll be a brand new dog owner. I've never owned a dog. So by the end of this year, total success for me would be new comedy show, lots of interesting speeches, and a little fluffy canine friend.
Fantastic. Of course, you have owned your next door neighbour's dog for a moment. So I guess you've experienced it.
Yeah, that's really what triggered it all off. Once I'd half stolen a dog.
I am going to ask one last question in the vault, just for those that are listening out there. So if I was sort of quite new to the L&D market at the moment, what's the one piece of advice you would give to someone who was new to a career in learning and development?
Well, it's so rewarding. I wouldn't hesitate to go into it. I have no regrets after doing it for the last 20 years or so. But I would try out being in large and small companies because that gives you quite different types of experience. It's very different being in a corporate like Unilever and then being in a small company with only 250 people, like the luxury hotel that I was working in a few years ago. And consider being freelance as well, as long as you're willing to be good at sales, because ultimately you do have to market and sell yourself all of the time if you want to do freelance work. But wherever you work, doesn't matter where you go, have a sense of humour.
Fantastic. Well, that's a brilliant way to finish the podcast. And as you say, if you laugh, you learn. So or when you laugh, you learn, I should say. So a brilliant way to finish. But listen, I want to say a huge thank you, Celia, for joining me today on the HR L&D podcast. I will, of course, put links to your website, which is celiadelaney.co.uk. You can see a number of her video-based learnings and examples of some of the speeches she's given, often the speeches and emceeing, things like that on her website as well. So please do go there. Of course, if you want to find out more about the I Persuade course, and if you want to see Celia's video-based learning on public speaking and persuasion, please go to speakingsuccess-tv.thinkific.com. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today on the HR L&D podcast, but I hope you've enjoyed this fantastic episode full of lots of laughs. Remember, you learn when you laugh. So keep laughing, enjoy the podcast, and I'll tune in with you all again in a couple of weeks. Thanks a lot.
You've been listening to the L&D podcast with your host Nick Day of JGA Recruitment, specialist HR recruiters. This podcast has been sponsored by Think Learning. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please review it, share it and subscribe so you never miss a future episode.